Dr. Harold Boss snatched the tranquilizer gun off the crash cart and aimed it directly at Rex. "I'm not asking anymore," he snarled, finger already on the trigger. "That animal dies in 3 seconds or I pull this trigger myself." The dog didn't flinch, didn't bark, just locked eyes with Voss like it was already measuring the distance between them. Alex Carter lay bleeding out on the gurney behind it, chest barely rising, and Voss didn't care. He cared about control. He cared about his authority, and he was about to execute a military war dog to prove it. Until one rookie nurse stepped forward and whispered 2 words that changed everything. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, and dispatch logged it the way they logged everything in Harlan County. Fast, flat, and without ceremony. Adult male, multiple lacerations, blunt force trauma, possible internal bleeding. Found on Route 9, 2 miles past the old grain mill. No ID, no wallet, no phone. A passing trucker had spotted him face down in the gravel shoulder and called it in before driving away, because people in Harlan County had learned not to get too involved with things they didn't understand. But the trucker hadn't mentioned the dog. Nobody had mentioned the dog. Paramedic Danny Ruiz was the first one to see it. He jumped out of the rig before it fully stopped, bag in hand, and he'd taken exactly 3 steps toward the body on the ground before something big and black and absolutely furious launched itself to its feet from the darkness beside the man and stood between them. Danny stopped breathing. He'd been a paramedic for 11 years. He'd walked into burning buildings. He'd pulled people out of flipped cars. He'd done CPR in the middle of a highway with semis flying past at 70 miles an hour. But he had never, not once in 11 years, felt fear the way he felt it in that moment, looking into the eyes of that dog. It wasn't barking, that was the thing. Dogs that were just scared, they barked. Dogs that were protecting something, they went quiet. And this dog was the quietest animal Danny had ever encountered in his life. It stood absolutely still, its body low, its ears flat, its eyes locked on Danny's face with an intelligence and a focus that was almost human. The growl that came out of it wasn't loud. It was deep, it was continuous, and it meant exactly one thing. You don't come any closer. "Hey, buddy," Danny said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. "Hey, easy. I'm not going to hurt him. I'm trying to help him." The dog didn't move. Danny's partner, Carla Mendez, appeared at his shoulder. She took one look at the dog and put her hand on Danny's arm. "Don't," she said. "He's going to die, Carla." "I know." They stood there for 3 full seconds that felt like 3 years. And then the man on the ground made a sound. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even really a groan. It was something lower and more basic than that. The sound a body makes when it is working very hard just to keep itself alive. And at the sound of it, the dog turned its head, just slightly, just enough to look at the man on the ground. And in that fraction of a second, Danny moved. He dropped to his knees beside the man and got his hands on him. And the dog swung back around instantly, and Danny felt the air move as its jaws snapped shut, maybe 2 inches from his ear. "Don't bite me," Danny said, low and even, and absolutely not a request. "I'm helping him. You understand me? I'm helping." The dog held. Barely, but it held. That was how Navy SEAL Alex Carter arrived at Harlan County General Hospital. In the back of a rig at just past midnight, bleeding from 6 separate wounds, with a 90-pound Belgian Malinois standing on the gurney beside him, and daring every single person in that building to try to take him away. The emergency department at Harlan County General was not a large operation. It had 8 bays, 2 trauma rooms, 1 overworked radiologist, and on any given Tuesday night, a staff of 11 people who had all seen plenty, but had never quite seen anything like this. Charge nurse Barbara Kowalski had been running this floor for 19 years. She was 58 years old. She had the shoulders of a woman who had carried more than her share, and she was not easily rattled. She was rattled. What in the... She caught herself, pivoted, and immediately shifted into command mode, which was the only mode she knew. Trauma 2, get Dr. Voss on the phone. Somebody call animal control. Animal control is closed, said one of the techs. Then call the police. Call somebody. I want that dog. The dog looked at her. Barbara stopped talking. She had 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren, and she went to church every Sunday. And she was not the kind of woman who was easily intimidated, but she was also a deeply practical person. And what she was looking at right now was a military working dog in full protection mode. And she had enough common sense to understand that practical problems required practical solutions. Screaming at the situation was not a practical solution. Okay, she said, dropping her voice. Okay, move slow. Don't make eye contact. We work around it. Around it? Dr. Voss appeared in the doorway of Trauma 2, his white coat still crooked from being pulled on fast, his reading glasses shoved up on his forehead. He looked at the gurney. He looked at the dog. He looked at Barbara. You're serious. Harold, that animal is a liability. It's a health code violation. It's an insurance nightmare. And if it bites one of my staff, if we don't get to this man in the next few minutes, he's going to die, Barbara said, and her voice was flat and final and brooked absolutely nothing. So you can call the lawyers in the morning. Right now you're going to do your job and I'm going to do mine. Voss looked at the dog again. The dog looked back at him. Voss swallowed. Fine, he said, but I want it documented that I objected. Duly noted, Barbara said, and moved. The man on the gurney was in his mid-30s, she estimated, though it was hard to tell with all the damage. 6'1", maybe 6'2", built like someone had assembled him specifically for the purpose of surviving things that would destroy other men. His clothes had already been cut away by the paramedics. Tactical pants, moisture-wicking shirt, both soaked through with blood. His forearms were marked with bruises that had the particular shape of impact injuries, the kind you got from blocking rather than from falling. His knuckles were split. His left side had a wound that concerned her deeply, a long, jagged cut that had bled a great deal and was still bleeding. And there was something wrong with his breathing, a slightly labored quality that suggested a possible rib fracture or worse. But it was his face that stopped her for just a moment. Even in the fluorescent wash of the trauma bay, even bruised and unconscious, there was something in that face, a kind of absolute stillness. Not peace. This was not a peaceful face. It was a controlled face. Even unconscious, even this badly hurt, the man looked like someone who had decided, somewhere very deep in himself, that he was not going to be moved. Vitals, she said, snapping back. BP 88/60 and dropping. Heart rate 112. Oxygen sat 94%. Get me 2 large-bore IVs, normal saline, wide open. Type and cross, CBC, BMP, coags, and I need a portable chest x-ray. The dog won't let the tech get close enough, said Marcus, one of her nurses. Barbara looked at the dog. The dog was watching the hands of everyone in the room simultaneously, its head moving in small, precise increments, tracking. Whenever anyone moved toward Alex's left side, the side with the worst injuries, the growl deepened. Talk to it, Barbara said. Calmly, tell it what you're doing before you do it. You want me to explain medical procedures to a dog. I want you to keep your arm, Marcus. So yes, I want you to explain medical procedures to the dog. Do it. Marcus took a breath. He held up his hands. He looked at the dog and said, in the most reasonable voice he could manage, I'm going to put in an IV line. It's going to help him, okay? I'm just going to touch his arm right here. The growl continued. but the dog didn't move. Marcus put in the IV. For 22 minutes, they worked around Rex, because that was the name on the dog's tags. Rex, along with a registration number and what appeared to be a military unit designation that none of them recognized. Voss got the chest X-ray up and studied it with the tight-eyed concentration of a man who was very good at his job, even when he was furious about the circumstances. 2 fractured ribs, he confirmed. No pneumothorax, which was something. The laceration on the left side was deep, but hadn't hit anything critical. The vitals were improving marginally with the fluid resuscitation. The bigger problem was that Alex Carter hadn't regained consciousness yet, and when they tried to examine his head, Rex lost his patience entirely. The tech got within about 18 inches of Alex's head with her penlight, and Rex came off the gurney, not attacking, but planting himself physically between the tech and Alex's face, his entire body rigid, his teeth showing. The tech stumbled backward into a supply cart and sent it clattering, and the crash made Alex's fingers twitch on the gurney and his head turn. And for one single second, his eyes opened. They were gray. She would remember that later, the color of his eyes. Gray like storm clouds, gray like old stone. They were open for maybe 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds, they moved, tracking, assessing, taking in the room the way a camera might, fast and systematic. They found the dog first. Something in his expressions shifted, barely perceptibly, but it was there. Then his eyes closed again, and he was under once more, and the room felt somehow smaller without those 4 seconds of consciousness in it. He was awake, the tech said, from where she was still pressed against the wall. He wasn't awake, Voss said. That was a reflexive response. I know what reflexive looks like, she said. He was awake. Barbara looked at the closed face on the gurney, at the dog standing over him, at the military tag on the dog's collar. Something was not adding up. She called it herself, the thought she'd been pushing away for the last 22 minutes. She stepped out of the trauma bay and into the hallway, and she pulled out her phone, and she looked up the unit designation on Rex's tag. It took her 4 tries to get the search right, and when she finally got a result, she stood in the corridor of her own hospital and felt the floor tilt slightly under her feet. The unit designation was for a Naval Special Warfare Development Group element, SEAL Team 6. Barbara was 58 years old, and she had lived her whole life in Harlan County, and she was the most grounded, sensible person she knew. And in this moment, she genuinely did not know what to do with what she was holding. She walked back into the trauma bay and looked at the man on the gurney, and looked at the dog, and looked at Dr. Voss, who was on the phone with the on-call surgeon and arguing about something. And she made a decision. She went to the nurse's station and she pulled the overnight roster. And that was when she saw the name at the bottom of the list. Emily Watson, first week of rotation, just out of nursing school, assigned to the overnight floor because nobody wanted the overnight floor, and rookies got what nobody wanted. Barbara hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up the desk phone and called down to the second floor. Emily Watson was 24 years old, and she had wanted to be a nurse for as long as she could remember, and she had been working at Harlan County General for exactly 6 days. She had not done anything remarkable in those 6 days. She had done everything exactly right, carefully, by the book, the way she'd been trained, and she had been largely invisible, which was fine. That was how you survive your first rotation. You kept your head down, you learned fast, you didn't step on toes, and you certainly, she had been told this explicitly, you did not get into other departments' business. So when the call came in from Barbara Kowalski asking her to come down to the ED, her first feeling was not excitement, it was dread. "What did I do?" she said to the empty break room. She took the stairs. Barbara met her outside the trauma bay doors and spoke quickly and quietly. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to just listen and not ask questions yet. We have a patient." "Is it about the dog?" Emily said. Barbara stopped. "How do you know about the dog?" "Word travels fast. Marcus texted half the floor. Emily looked at the doors. Military working dog? Belgian Malinois. He's protecting the patient and we can't get near enough to complete the assessment. The patient has regained partial consciousness twice, but won't respond to us, won't accept treatment, and we can't control the dog. Barbara paused. I pulled his tag. The unit designation. Can I see it? Barbara held out her phone. Emily looked at the number. She looked at it for a long time. Her face did something complicated. What? Barbara said. Emily handed the phone back. My father was in that unit, she said. He retired 8 years ago. He was part of the group for almost 15 years. She paused. I grew up around these men. I know what they're trained to do. I know what the dog is trained to do. And I know why he won't accept treatment. Tell me. Because he doesn't know if you're safe, Emily said simply. He's trained not to trust strangers in unfamiliar environments when he's vulnerable. It's not stubbornness, it's protocol. His brain is running a threat assessment, and you're all failing it because you don't know the parameters. Barbara looked at her for a moment. Can you pass the assessment? Emily thought about her father, about the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, about the low voice he used when he talked about the men he served with, about the things he'd told her that she'd never told anyone else, had never even really understood until right now. Maybe, she said, I want to try. The dog could hurt you. Yes, Emily said, he could. She pushed open the trauma bay doors. The first thing she did was stop. She stood just inside the doors, and she didn't move, and she didn't speak, and she made her hands open and loose at her sides. She looked at Rex. Rex looked at her. The growl, which had become almost like background noise in the trauma bay, constant, low, relentless, didn't stop. But it also didn't escalate. Everyone else in the room was watching her. Could everyone take 2 steps back, please? She said, without turning around. She heard shuffling, shoes on tile, the ambient sound of monitors. A little more, she said. More shuffling. Thank you. She took 1 step forward, just one. She didn't move her eyes off Rex. She didn't try to make herself small or non-threatening. She'd been told once, by her father's friend, a man named Tom who'd handled dogs for 12 years, that the worst thing you could do with a protection-trained Malinois was act nervous. They were tuned to read human emotional states with a precision that exceeded most humans' ability to read each other. Fear was an invitation to escalate, so she didn't act afraid. She wasn't, entirely. She was something more complex than afraid. Hey Rex, she said, and her voice was quiet and even and direct. Not soft. These dogs didn't respond to soft the way pet dogs did. Direct. Honest. You're doing a good job. I can see that. He's safe because of you. That's real. The growl continued, but the quality of it shifted slightly. Something in the timbre. I'm not here to take him from you, she said. I'm here to help him. The same thing you're trying to do. We want the same thing, you and me. She took another step. Rex lowered his head about an inch. Not in submission, in focus. He was reading her. I know what you need, she said, and now she was addressing the man on the gurney and the dog equally. And she kept her voice at exactly the same register, because some part of her understood that the man could hear her, even if he wasn't showing it. I know what it takes. I know what you were taught, and I know that right now your whole body is telling you not to let anyone close, not to let anyone in, because that's how you stay alive. I understand that. She was close enough now to touch the gurney. She didn't touch it yet. But you're hurt, she said, and I can fix that. That's my whole job. That's the only reason I'm standing here. Voss, from across the room, made a sound. Don't, Barbara said to him, very quietly. Emily reached out, slowly, and put her hand on the side rail of the gurney, about 2 feet from where Rex was standing. The dog's head swung toward her hand. She kept it still. She let him look. She let him smell. And then Alex Carter's eyes opened again. They found her immediately, gray and sharp and absolutely present, not the reflexive flutter from before, but full, genuine consciousness, and the intelligence in them hit her like a physical force. He looked at her face. He looked at her hand on the rail. He looked at Rex. Something crossed his expression, something she couldn't name exactly, but it was the look of a man running a very fast calculation. "Hey," she said, to him directly, for the first time. "You're at Harlan County General. You're safe. You've lost a significant amount of blood, and you have some injuries that need attention. I need to help you." His jaw tightened. He said nothing. "I know you don't trust this room," she said. "I know you don't trust me. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me do my job." His eyes moved to Rex. Rex was still watching Emily, still assessing, still deciding, and Alex Carter's hand, the one closest to her, opened. Slowly. The fingers uncurled from the fists they'd been making and lay flat on the sheet. It was not consent, not yet, but it was the first thing he had given them since the moment he arrived, and in the charged silence of that trauma bay, it felt enormous. "Okay," Emily said softly. "Okay, let's start there." She reached for his wrist to check his pulse, and Rex watched her hand move, and the growl continued, low and steady, the sound of a threshold not yet crossed, a door not yet opened, a story not yet told. And somewhere in the machinery of that moment, in the gap between what Alex Carter was and what Emily Watson had just offered, something began to shift. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, but it shifted. And none of them, not Barbara watching from the doorway with her arms crossed, not Voss with his jaw tight and his eyes narrow, not Marcus or the tech, or any of the 11 people standing in that corridor who had no idea what was happening but understood that something was. None of them would be able to say, afterward, exactly when it happened. They would only know that it did. His fingers were still open on the sheet. That was the only invitation Emily Watson was going to get, and she knew it. She didn't wait for more. She wrapped 2 fingers around Alex Carter's wrist, gently, but without hesitation, and she counted. His pulse was fast, irregular at the edges, and too weak for a man his size. She felt it the way she'd been trained to feel things, not just as data, but as information about a person, about what they were fighting. 96/64, Marcus called from the monitor. "He's still dropping," Voss said from across the room. He had put the chart down. He was watching Emily with an expression she couldn't quite read, somewhere between grudging curiosity and the professional frustration of a man who needed to work and kept getting blocked. "We need imaging. We need to know if there's internal bleeding." "I know," Emily said. "Then move faster." "I'm moving at exactly the right speed," she said without looking at him. Barbara made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly converted into a cough. Alex's gray eyes were still open, still watching Emily's face. She could feel the weight of that attention. It wasn't passive. It wasn't the foggy half-consciousness of a man drifting in and out. He was fully present. He was reading her the same way Rex was reading her, with the same calibrated focus, and she understood in that moment that the man and the dog were essentially running the same program, the same training, the same instinct. You didn't get close to people you didn't trust. You didn't let them touch you. You survived by never lowering your guard. She held his wrist, and she met his eyes, and she said, very quietly, "I know what you're doing right now. You're deciding if I'm a threat. You're looking for inconsistencies. You're checking whether my hands are calm." She paused. "They are. Check." Something shifted in his face. It was barely a movement, just the faintest change in the tension around his eyes, the suggestion of a man recalibrating. Rex beside him moved one ear. "Your left side is the priority," Emily said. "The laceration. There may be deeper damage, and I need to assess it, but I need you to hold still, and I need Rex to let me do that. Can you?" She stopped. She changed tactics. "Direct. Honest. Tell him." Alex Carter's chest rose and fell. Once, twice, and then, in a voice that was barely audible and rough as gravel, he said one word. Fuss. Rex sat down. The room went absolutely silent. Not the quiet of an empty space, but the specific, stunned silence of 11 people who had just watched something they didn't entirely believe. Marcus's mouth was open. The tech in the corner had both hands pressed flat against the wall behind her. Even Voss, who had been on the edge of escalating the entire situation for the last 40 minutes, had gone completely still. Rex sat at the foot of the gurney, upright, ears forward, every muscle coiled with readiness. He was not relaxed. He was never going to be relaxed in this room. But he was no longer blocking access, and in the language of what had been happening for the last 40-plus minutes, that was the equivalent of throwing open a door. Okay, Barbara said from the doorway. Her voice was steady, professional, like they hadn't just witnessed a military working dog obey a half-conscious trauma patient on command. Let's move. 12:34 a.m., they moved. Emily stayed at Alex's left side while Marcus took his right. Voss came in from the foot of the gurney, angling for the laceration, and he was professional enough and, Emily suspected, scared enough of Rex to work efficiently and without commentary. The wound was deep. Voss confirmed it with 2 probes in a tight jaw. Muscular damage, possible involvement of the oblique, he said. He needs the OR. Not yet, Alex said. Everyone stopped. His voice was stronger than it had been 30 seconds ago. Still rough, still damaged by whatever he'd been through, but present and clear and not remotely negotiable. Sir, you have a serious, Voss began. I said, not yet. Alex's eyes moved to Voss's face and stayed there with a flatness that made Voss take a half step back without seeming to realize he'd done it. I need to make a call first. You are not in a position to be making phone calls. I need to make a call, Alex repeated, or everything that happened tonight goes sideways in ways you cannot fix with a surgery. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Voss opened his mouth. Harold, Barbara said. Voss closed his mouth. Barbara looked at Alex. We can give you 3 minutes, she said. After 3 minutes, your condition may force our hand, regardless of what you want. I'm being straight with you. Alex looked at her, a beat. Fair, he said. Emily, Barbara turned. Stay with him. Emily nodded. Everyone else moved to the outer edges of the trauma bay, and the space around the gurney became briefly almost private. Rex watched the retreating staff with professional suspicion, and then looked back at Alex. Alex looked at Emily. Phone, he said. I don't have vest pocket, Emily blinked. Your clothes were... She stopped. She looked at the pile of cut clothing in the biohazard bag at the foot of the gurney, and she reached in without flinching and found, in what remained of a vest pocket that had been cut away separately from the shirt, a phone in a ruggedized case that looked like it had survived things most phones were never asked to survive. She handed it to him. His hands were not entirely steady. He noticed her noticing. Cracked ribs, he said. Like that explained everything. Among other things, she said. He almost smiled. It looked like something he'd forgotten how to do. He made the call with the phone held close to his ear, and his voice dropped so low that she could only catch fragments, and she was professional enough not to try to catch more. What she heard was a name, not a full name, just a call sign she didn't recognize. A location confirmation. A phrase she did recognize. A brevity code from the world she'd grown up adjacent to, and it made her stomach do something complicated. And then a long silence on his end while someone talked, and his face during that silence was a piece of granite, perfectly still, giving nothing. Then, understood, 7 hours. He hung up. He handed her back the phone. Okay, he said, do what you need to do. Just like that, she said. Just like that. She looked at him for 1 second longer than she meant to. Who were you calling? Someone who needed to know I'm alive. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. She held his gaze for another beat, and then she turned and signaled Voss. He's ready, she said. 12:51 a.m. The next 40 minutes were the organized chaos that emergency medicine always was when it was working correctly. All of it moving fast and with purpose. They got the full assessment done. They got imaging. They got a line into his other arm and blood products running because his hemoglobin was not where it needed to be. Voss, when he finally got proper access to the wound, made the kind of focused, professional sounds that indicated it was bad but manageable. And Emily stayed close enough to be useful and far enough from Rex to keep the dog's anxiety at a manageable level. She also watched Alex. Not because she was supposed to. She was supposed to be watching the monitors, tracking the fluid balance, updating the chart. She did all of that, but she also watched him because she was trying to understand what she was looking at. She had grown up around her father's colleagues, around men who had been to the same places Alex Carter had been to, and she thought she knew the type. She thought she understood what these men were, but she had never seen one like this, from this close, in this context. Most people, when they were badly hurt and afraid, got smaller. They contracted. They became more childlike, not in a weak way, just in the way of any creature that needed protection. Alex Carter did not get smaller. He remained exactly the same size in the room that he'd been when his eyes first opened. The pain was there. She could see it in the set of his jaw, in the controlled evenness of his breathing, in the way he didn't move his torso unless he had to. He was in significant pain. He was managing it with a discipline that honestly made her feel slightly inadequate. Your oxygen sat is improving, she told him, because she thought he'd want information rather than comfort. 97%. The fluids are helping. Good, he said. Do you have any allergies I should know about? No. When did you last eat? A pause. 14 hours ago. Okay, she noted it. Are you going to tell me what happened? No. Fair enough. She checked the line at his right arm. Is there anyone I should call? Family? Someone who? No. The word came out fast and clean like a door shutting. She didn't push it. Across the bay, Rex had not moved from his seated position at the foot of the gurney. He was watching Emily with the steady, unblinking concentration of a professional doing a job, which was exactly what he was. Every so often, his gaze would shift to a nurse or a tech moving in the room, assess, return to Emily. He was running surveillance on the entire space and doing it continuously, without break, without fatigue. And it occurred to Emily that in some ways, Rex was doing the same thing Alex's body was doing, maintaining function under conditions that would have shut down most organisms. What's his full name? Emily asked. The dog. Alex glanced toward Rex. Something in his face changed. Not much, just a very slight softening that happened so fast she almost missed it. Rex, he said. Just Rex. How long have you been together? 4 years. He trusts you completely. Yeah, and you trust him the same way. Alex looked at her. It was the first time he had looked at her with something other than assessment or controlled neutrality. There was something else in it, something she might have called recognition if she'd had a reason to use that word. Yeah, he said again, differently. 1:17 a.m. Voss finished his work on the laceration and stripped off his gloves with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times. He looked at the monitors. He looked at Alex. He looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't entirely decode. Stable, he said. For now, I still want him in the OR. In the morning, Alex said. Tonight would be in the morning, Alex said again. And the thing about the way he said it was that there was no anger in it, no aggression, no performance. He just stated it the way a person stated a fact about the weather, with absolute certainty that it was true. Voss looked at Barbara. Barbara looked at Emily. Emily said, 7 hours. Voss frowned. 7 hours for what? He needs to be here and accessible for 7 hours, Emily said. After that, surgery. That's the arrangement. What arrangement? Nobody arranged anything with me. Harold. Barbara's voice was quiet and extremely final. Go chart. Voss stared at her. You are not seriously. Go chart. He left. The doors swung behind him with more force than was strictly necessary. The remaining staff in the trauma bay exchanged glances and began the quiet business of pulling back, giving the space room to breathe. Barbara stopped at Emily's shoulder on her way out. You have him for 7 hours, she murmured. Don't let me regret this. You won't, Emily said. I know, Barbara said. That's not actually what I'm worried about. She looked at Alex and then at Emily, and her expression was the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things in 19 years and understood that she was currently watching something that did not have a neat category. Be careful, she said. It was the kind of careful that didn't mean physical safety. Emily understood that. 1:33 a.m., the trauma bay got quiet. Not empty. There was still monitoring, still periodic checks, still the constant soft readout of the machines, but quiet in the way that the middle of the night in a hospital has its own specific quality of quiet, heavier than daytime quiet, more honest. Emily sat on the stool beside the gurney and updated the chart and didn't speak. And Alex lay still with his eyes toward the ceiling, and Rex maintained his position, and for a while the only sounds were the monitors and the distant noises of the hospital going about its necessary business. It was Alex who broke the silence. You're not scared of him, he said, meaning Rex. No, she said, most people are. I know. He turned his head on the pillow to look at her. Why aren't you? She considered the question honestly. My father had a dog like Rex. Not military. My father didn't bring work home, not the physical parts. But he had a friend, Tom, who'd handled dogs for 12 years. And Tom used to bring his dog over on Sundays. Ranger, a Malinois. She paused, remembering. Ranger terrified every single person who came to the house. Every single one except me. Tom said I was either very brave or very dumb. Which was it? I was 8, she said. Probably both. Alex was quiet for a moment. Your father was military. It wasn't a question exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. Yes, she said. What branch? Navy. He absorbed this. His jaw did something. What unit? She looked at him steadily. You know I'm not going to answer that. A beat, and then the faintest, briefest hint of something at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, he wasn't ready for that yet, but the shadow of one. Fair enough, he said, and something in the room changed. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, just a degree or two of temperature, a fraction of distance closed. The way a door doesn't open all at once, but starts, first, by becoming slightly less closed. 2:09 a.m. The twist came the way real twists always did. Not announced, not dramatic, not preceded by music or warning. Emily was checking Alex's blood pressure for the 3rd time in 40 minutes when she noticed something on his right forearm that the initial assessment had cataloged as bruising. She looked at it more carefully. It wasn't bruising, or it wasn't only bruising. Under the yellowing edges of impact trauma, there was a tattoo, and it was not the kind of tattoo you got at a parlor on a weekend. It was small and precise and very specific, a design that she had seen exactly once before in her life, on the forearm of a man who had sat at her father's kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon when she was 16 years old, and who had looked at her with the same gray eyes and the same controlled stillness, and who her father had introduced only as a friend from the teams. Her hand went still on Alex's arm. Her breathing did not change. She had enough control for that. But her hand went still, and Alex felt it, and he looked down at her hand and then up at her face. What? He said. Not a question, an observation. This tattoo, she said. What about it? She kept her voice completely even. I've seen it before. Alex's eyes sharpened. The monitors were steady. Rex's ears moved forward 1 centimeter. Where? He said. On a man named Thomas Karev, she said. He was at my father's house. Once, 8 years ago. I was 16. She paused. He said it was the mark of a specific group within the teams. A very small group. He said there were fewer than 30 men alive who had this exact mark. Alex was very still. He's dead, he said. The words hit her like a physical impact. She had not been expecting that. She didn't show it. She kept her face steady, her hands steady, everything steady. But something inside her chest did something it shouldn't have. How? She said. 2 years ago, Alex said, and his voice was exactly as controlled and flat as it always was. But underneath it, she could hear, she could feel, the kind of loss that doesn't have a dramatic expression because it's been carried too long for that. On a job, he was my team leader for 7 years. Emily released his arm. She stood up from the stool, and she took 2 steps away from the gurney, and she stood with her back to him for exactly 5 seconds, and then she turned around. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yeah," he said. She came back to the stool, and she sat down and she looked at the monitors, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Rex looked between them, reading the shift, processing. "He talked about his daughter once," Alex said, quietly. "Said she wanted to be a nurse." Emily felt every single hair on her arms stand up. She looked at Alex. Alex looked at her. "Tom's daughter," he said slowly, "would be about 24 now." Her throat tightened. "Tom's last name was Karev," she said. "My last name is Watson." "Your mother's name?" She held his gaze for a long moment. "You're very good at this," she said. "I've had practice." She said nothing. He said nothing. And the silence that stretched between them in that moment was not the silence of 2 strangers, but the silence of 2 people standing at the edge of a fact that was too large to step into all at once. That required a moment, just a moment, of stillness before the world rearranged itself around it. Rex lay down at the foot of the gurney, flat, chin on paws, eyes still open, but down. It was the first time he had been fully down since they arrived. 2:47 a.m., she told him. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Her father, her real father, the man on her birth certificate, the man named Watson who had worked at the hardware store and coached Little League, had died when she was 9. And her mother had remarried when Emily was 12. And the man she married was a quiet, careful, deeply private Navy man who had never talked about his work and had attended exactly 2 of her school events because he was never in town and had been overseas for her high school graduation and had sent a card with a $100 bill in it and a note that said, in 4 words, "I am proud, M." She had said at her nursing school graduation that she dedicated her degree to her stepfather. She had not said his name. He had asked her not to, which had hurt, but she understood it. Or she tried to. "He's still alive?" Alex asked. "Yes," she said. "He's in Portland. He has a house. He grows tomatoes." She paused on the absurdity of that. "He grows tomatoes and he has a dog and he watches football on Sundays. And he is the most ordinary-looking retired person you have ever seen. And you had no idea." "I knew he was Navy," she said. "I knew it was something serious. I didn't know the unit. I didn't know the designation. But you recognize the tattoo." "I recognize the tattoo," she said. Alex was quiet for a long moment. "Small world," he said. "Impossibly small," she agreed. He looked at the ceiling. His jaw worked slightly, processing something. "He saved my life," he said. "Your father. 3 years before Karev died. On a job in a place I cannot name. He pulled me out of a situation, and he took 2 hits doing it, and he never..." He stopped. "He never said a word about it. Just kept moving. That's the kind of man he is." Emily's throat was doing things she didn't have words for. She held them down. "He never told me anything," she said. "He wouldn't," Alex said. That's not how it works. It's not that he didn't trust you. It's that world has a wall around it. and the wall protects the people inside it and the people outside it both. I know, she said. I know that, She stopped, steadied. I just wish I had known growing up. I wish I had known the shape of what he was carrying. Alex turned his head to look at her again. You knew, he said. You recognized the tattoo. You walked into this room when nobody else would. You knew the right way to approach Rex, the right voice, the right posture. You knew how to talk to me. He paused. You know more than you think you know. You grew up with it. It got into you whether you understood it or not. She looked at him for a long moment. Is that your version of a compliment? Yeah, he said. It is. She almost laughed. She caught it, but barely. And Rex, at the foot of the gurney, made a small sound. Not a growl, nothing like a growl. A low, soft exhale. The sound a dog makes when the threat assessment finally comes back clear. Emily looked at him. He looked back at her with dark, patient eyes that held something that might, on a human face, have been called acceptance. She reached out carefully and rested her hand on the end of the gurney near his paws. He looked at her hand. He put his nose against it, cold and precise in brief. Then he pulled back and resumed his watch. He likes you, Alex said. He's tolerating me, she said. For Rex, Alex said. Those are the same thing. She sat back on the stool. She picked up the chart. She looked at the monitors. 2:53 a.m. 4 hours and 7 minutes until whatever was coming would arrive. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know what 7 hours meant, or who Alex had called, or what kind of situation had put him on the side of Route 9 with 6 wounds and a military dog and no ID. But she knew that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because of the job, not because of the training, because of something older and more specific than either of those things. Something that had been waiting for her since she was 16 years old, and a quiet man named Tom had sat at her family's kitchen table and looked at her with gray eyes and said, of his dog, he only accepts the people who deserve it. She hadn't understood that then. She understood it now. 3:04 a.m. The quiet didn't last. It never did. Not in a hospital. Not in the middle of a situation like this one. And Emily had been around enough of her father's world to know that quiet was rarely a sign that nothing was happening. Quiet was usually a sign that something was happening somewhere else, out of sight, and moving in your direction. The first indication was Marcus. He appeared at the trauma bay doors at 3:04 a.m. with the specific expression of a man delivering information he didn't want to deliver. The tight around the eyes look that Emily had already learned meant the thing he was about to say was going to complicate something. There are 2 men at the front desk, he said. They're asking for him. Alex's eyes moved to Marcus immediately, fully awake, fully present. Describe them. Marcus blinked at being addressed directly but recovered fast. Both male, 40s, civilian clothes, but he paused, searching for the word. Not civilian. You know what I mean? Like they're wearing regular clothes the same way a costume is regular clothes. Badges? No badges, government ID. They wouldn't let me see the full thing. Alex looked at Emily. Something passed between them that wasn't quite a conversation, but was faster than one. How did they know where he was? She said to Alex. I didn't tell them, he said flatly. Then how? The phone call, he said. Someone else made a call they weren't supposed to make. His jaw tightened. Or the truck driver, or the paramedics, or someone in this building. He was already moving, pushing himself up on one elbow, and the monitors immediately complained about it, the heart rate spiking on the screen, and Rex came to his feet like a switch had been thrown. Stop, Emily said, her hand on his shoulder before she'd consciously decided to move. You are not getting off this gurney. Those men cannot come in here. Then they won't come in here. I will handle it. She looked at him with an evenness she mostly felt. Lie back down. He looked at her hand on his shoulder. He looked at her face. He made a calculation. He lay back down. Marcus, Emily said, turning, Tell them the patient is in active treatment and cannot receive visitors. If they push, get Barbara. Barbara's on break. Then get whoever is not on break and use the word HIPAA loudly and clearly. Marcus nodded and disappeared. Alex watched the doors swing closed. They'll push past him, he said. Maybe, Emily said. Let's find out. 3:11 a.m. They pushed past him. Emily heard it before she saw it. Raised voices in the corridor. Marcus saying something sharp, and then the doors swung open and two men walked into the trauma bay with the particular forward momentum of people who had decided that doors were a formality that applied to other people. The first one was broad and sandy-haired and held his government ID up like a shield. The second one was thinner, quieter, and he was the one Emily immediately identified as the more dangerous of the two because he wasn't looking at Alex. He was looking at the room, cataloging it. Rex came off his position at the foot of the gurney and put himself directly between the two men and Alex, and the sound that came out of him was not the controlled professional warning he'd been maintaining all night. This was different, lower, more absolute. The broad man stopped walking. "Sir," he said, addressing Alex over Rex's head, "we need to speak with you about—" "You need to leave this room," Emily said. The man looked at her for the first time. "And you are?" "His nurse, which means this is my room. You can speak with hospital administration in the morning." "This is a matter of—" "This is a trauma bay," she said, "and the patient is in active recovery, and you do not have the medical authority to override that, regardless of what your ID says. So I'll ask you once more, politely, to step outside." The thin man, who had still not spoken, shifted his attention from the room to Emily. He looked at her with the careful, evaluative attention of someone who was recalculating. Then he looked at Alex. "Carter," he said. His voice was mild. That mildness was clearly intentional. Alex said nothing. "We just need to know the location of the package," the thin man said. "Still mild, still patient. That's all. Give us that and we're gone." The monitor at Alex's bedside beeped twice. His heart rate had gone up. Emily saw it, but she didn't look at it. She kept her eyes on the thin man. "He's not answering questions tonight," she said. "He doesn't need to answer questions," the thin man said, and for the first time the mildness slipped. Just slightly, just enough to show what was under it. "He just needs to tell us where the package is." Rex took one step forward. The broad man took one step back. "I'm going to call security," Marcus said from the doorway. "Please do that, Marcus," Emily said. The thin man held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he looked at Alex. Whatever he saw there, and Alex's face was completely expressionless, completely still, the face of a man who had decided not to give anything, seemed to satisfy some internal calculation, because he put his ID away and he said, quietly, 7 hours is a long time for a man in your condition." "Long enough," Alex said, his first words since the two men had entered the room, clean and final. The thin man nodded once. He turned. The broad man followed. The doors swung behind them. Emily waited until she heard their footsteps stop being audible in the corridor. Then she let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding and turned to face Alex. "Package," she said. "Don't," he said. "I'm not asking you to tell me what it is," she said. "I'm asking if it's the reason someone beat you to within an inch of your life and left you on Route 9 in the middle of the night." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "And those men are not who they say they are," he said. "Their ID is real. Their authority to collect what they're asking for is not." He paused. "That's as much as I can tell you." It was more than she'd expected. She nodded. Okay." He studied her face like he was looking for the part where she panicked or pushed back or did the thing that people who weren't trained to handle this kind of information usually did. She was already writing in the chart. "I've known things I wasn't allowed to know my entire life," she said without looking up. "I got used to it." Rex settled back into position. He was still watching the doors. So was Emily. 3:38 a.m. Barbara found out about the two men at 3:38 a.m., and she was not pleased. She appeared in the doorway of the trauma bay with her arms crossed and her face arranged into the expression that Emily had privately come to think of as the Kowalski problem face. The look of a woman identifying the exact dimensions of a situation before deciding how to deal with it. "Tell me everything," she said to Emily, "right now, all of it." Emily told her, not the parts Alex had told her in confidence, she held those, but the visit, the ID, the question about the package, the thin man's parting comment. Barbara listened without interrupting, which was how Emily knew she was genuinely alarmed. "I need to call the administrator on call," Barbara said when she finished. "I think that's the right move," Emily said. "I also think," Barbara said, dropping her voice, "that we might want to consider moving him. If those men come back, they won't come back tonight," Alex said. Both women looked at him. "They're establishing the perimeter right now," he said matter-of-factly, in the tone of a man explaining traffic patterns. "They'll come back when they think they have enough leverage to come back with. That won't be tonight." Barbara stared at him. "You're lying in a hospital bed with cracked ribs, and you're running tactical analysis on the men who just—" "Yes," he said simply. She stared at him a moment longer. Then she looked at Emily. "I don't know whether to be reassured or terrified." "Both," Emily suggested. "Both," Barbara agreed, and left to make her calls. 4:15 a.m. The hour between 4 and 5 in the morning was the hour that hospitals belong to themselves. The emergency pace slowed. The overnight floor breathed. The monitors kept their quiet conversation with each other, and the staff moved in reduced numbers through corridors that felt wider at this hour somehow, as if the building itself was exhaling. Emily sat beside Alex, and she did not sleep, and neither did he, and they talked. And it was the kind of talking that happens at 4 a.m. in the specific context of having been through something together. Low-voiced, honest, unburdened by the performances that daytime conversation requires. She told him about nursing school, about the professor who had told her she was too emotional for critical care, and how she had spent 3 years proving him wrong. About the day she had passed her boards and called her stepfather, and he had said, in that 4-word way he had, "You did good, Em." Alex listened. He was a good listener in the way that people who spent most of their lives reading situations were good listeners. Fully attentive, not waiting for his turn to speak, just taking in what was said. "Do you like it?" he asked. "The work." "I love it," she said without hesitation. "Even the hard parts. Maybe especially the hard parts." "Why?" "Because the hard parts are when it matters most," she said. When someone is actually scared, actually in pain, and you're the person between them and that fear. There's nothing that feels more like a reason to be alive than that. He was quiet for a moment. "That's why people join the teams," he said. "Or one of the reasons. The real reason, not the one you say in the recruitment video." He paused. "The feeling of being exactly where the thing that needs to happen is happening." "Yes," she said, "exactly that." Rex made a small sound, a low, contented exhale. Both of them looked at him. "He does that when he's decided something is okay," Alex said. "What's he decided is okay?" "You," Alex said. And the simplicity of it, the way he said it like it was a measurable fact rather than a feeling, landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. She looked back at the chart and she did not say anything. But something in her face must have shown because Alex, who read faces the way other people read road signs, made a quiet sound that was almost a laugh. "Don't get sentimental," he said. "I'm not," she said. "You are," he said. "I'm not," she said again, and this time she was smiling, and she didn't bother hiding it. 4:52 a.m. The twist that changed everything arrived at 4:52 a.m., and it arrived through Emily's own phone. She didn't recognize the number. She almost didn't answer it. It was nearly 5 in the morning, and unknown numbers at 5 in the morning were either wrong numbers or the specific kind of news that rearranged your life. But something made her answer it, some instinct she couldn't name, and she stood up from the stool and stepped 2 feet away from the gurney and said, "Hello." The voice on the other end was a voice she had not heard in 4 months. Quiet, measured, with the particular cadence of a man who had learned, over decades, to put exactly as much into a sentence as it needed, and not one syllable more. "Em," her stepfather said, "are you at the hospital?" She went very still. "How do you know that?" "Are you with a patient right now, a man named Carter?" The back of her neck went cold. "How do you know that?" she said again, and this time it wasn't a question. A pause, the kind of pause she recognized from her entire childhood. The pause of a man deciding how much to let through the wall. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said. "The men who came to the hospital tonight, the 2 men, do not let them near him again." "I didn't let them near him at all." "Good." Something in his voice shifted. Relief, barely audible, present. "Good. Listen, what I'm about to tell you, I'm telling you because you're already in it, and I cannot pull you out of it now, and the only thing I can do is make sure you're not in it blind." "Okay," she said. "Carter has something," he said. "Documentation. Evidence of something that certain people inside a government agency have spent 3 years trying to bury. He was supposed to deliver it tonight, and the job went wrong. The men at the hospital are not operating under any legitimate authority. They are operating under a private directive from the people who want that documentation to disappear." Emily turned slightly and looked at Alex. He was watching her face. He had heard the word Carter. He was running the same fast calculation she was. "Who sent them?" she said. "I can't tell you that on this line." "Is Alex in danger in this building right now?" "Not for the next..." A pause. She heard paper. "Not for the next 2 hours. After that, the window closes and things get complicated." "What happens in 2 hours?" "Someone arrives who can take custody of what Carter is carrying and get it where it needs to go," her stepfather said. "If that happens, the men who came tonight lose their reason to be there. Carter stops being a problem for them and becomes too expensive to pursue." "And if it doesn't happen in 2 hours?" The pause this time was longer. "Then it becomes a different kind of situation," he said. "One I would very much prefer you not be in the middle of." Emily turned fully to face Alex. He was watching her with those gray eyes, completely still, completely awake, and she saw in his face that he had already understood most of what she was being told. Not from her words, from her posture, from the set of her face, from the small readable signals that she didn't know she was broadcasting. He was reading her the way Rex read a room, complete and fast and accurate. She held his gaze and said into the phone, 2 hours. 2 hours, her stepfather confirmed. Another pause, the longest one. "I know I owe you more than this call. I know that. We can talk about that later," she said. "Yes," he said, "we will." A beat. "You're doing good work, kid." She hung up. The trauma bay was very quiet. The monitors beeped their steady, patient rhythms. Rex's ears were forward. "How much did you hear?" she said to Alex. "Enough," he said. 2 hours, she said. "I know. Who's coming?" "Someone I trust," he said, which is a short list. "Is your stepfather on it?" she said, and it came out before she'd fully decided to say it. Alex's expression shifted in a way she hadn't seen yet. Something behind his eyes moved. Surprise, maybe, or the particular reaction of a man who had been read accurately when he thought he was unreadable. "How did you know?" he said. "The voice on the phone," she said. "He knew your name, your situation, and my number. He knew about the men tonight before I had a chance to tell him. He knew the timeline." She paused. "And he has the same way of leaving silence in a conversation that you do." Alex looked at her for a long moment. "He trained me," he said, 12 years ago. He was my team leader before Karev." The room tilted slightly under her feet. Not literally, she was too steady for that, but internally, in the architecture of everything she thought she understood about her life, something structural shifted. He trained you, she said. He was the one who taught me how to read a room, Alex said, how to read people, how to know who to trust when everything is telling you not to trust anyone. A pause. He would have said you were exactly the right person to be in this room tonight. He's a good judge. He's also the reason, she said slowly, that I recognized your tattoo. He had the same one. I saw it when I was 16. She breathed. I thought it was just a thing I remembered. I didn't know it was a unit marker. He would have known you'd remember it, Alex said. He has a memory for what people notice. A pause. He probably knew when he sent you to nursing school. He didn't send me to nursing school, she said. That was my choice. I know, Alex said. But he knew you'd be good at it. He knew you'd end up somewhere like this. He looked at the ceiling. He's not a man who leaves things to chance. She sat back down on the stool. She felt the weight of everything she'd learned in the last 5 hours settling into her bones. Not crushing her, but substantive, real. The weight of a story that turned out to be larger than she'd known she was part of. He should have told me, she said, about who he was, what the work was. Yes, Alex said, and he said it simply, without defense, without the qualified agreement she might have expected from a man who lived by the same code of silence. He should have. The directness of it startled her. You don't think the wall protects? I think the wall protects the mission, he said. It doesn't always protect the people on the other side of it. And sometimes you don't know the difference until it's too late to fix it. He paused. He knows that. He's known it a long time. She looked at her hands. The nurse's hands that had learned to stay steady so that other people could fall apart around them. Her father's hands in a way, though not by blood. All of it connected. All of it running back through the years to a kitchen table on a Sunday and a quiet man who grew tomatoes now and had never once told her the shape of what he'd built. Rex made a sound. Low, warm, different from anything she'd heard from him all night. He stood up from the foot of the gurney and walked the 3 steps to her side and sat down next to the stool and put his head on her knee. Not a threat assessment, not a calculated permission, just a dog deciding that someone was worth sitting next to. Emily put her hand on his head, carefully, and he let her. And Alex watched this from the gurney without saying anything, and the monitors kept their rhythm. And outside the windows of Harlan County General, the sky was beginning, very gradually, to go from black to the particular dark blue that came before anything else. The color of the world deciding whether or not to continue. 1 hour and 53 minutes. She watched the clock, and she kept her hand on Rex's head, and she breathed, and she waited, and she was ready. 5:09 a.m. The clock on the wall said 5:09, and Emily had stopped looking at it every 2 minutes, which was progress. She had started looking at it every 5 minutes instead, which was not much progress, but it was something. Rex had not moved from beside her stool. His head was no longer on her knee. He had straightened up about 20 minutes ago, his ears going forward, his attention shifting back to the doors in the particular way that meant his internal alert system had recalibrated to a new level of readiness. She felt it before she understood it. The change in him. The way the air in the room got a different quality. Alex felt it too. Someone's in the building, he said. Not the 2 men from before. She knew that instinctively from the way Rex was reading it. Not the low, aggressive warning he'd run all night, but something more complex, a kind of focused anticipation that she didn't have a clean word for. Good someone or bad someone, she said. Unknown, Alex said. Rex would be louder if it was the other two. That's reassuring. It's the best I've got right now. She stood up. She moved to the doors and looked through the narrow window into the corridor. Empty. The overnight lighting made everything look like the inside of a thought you weren't sure you were having. She turned back to Alex. How are you feeling? She said. Fine. On a scale of 1 to 10. Fine. That's not a number. 4, he said. Maybe 5. Your blood pressure is still lower than I want it. She moved back to the monitor. 94/61. Better than 2 hours ago. Not as good as she needed it to be. If your contact doesn't show in the next, he'll show, Alex said. You sound very certain for a man who's been lying in a trauma bay all night. I'm certain because he's never been late in 12 years, Alex said. Not once. Not to anything. A pause. Your father is many things. Late is not one of them. She processed that. The word father sat differently in her chest every time it was used in connection with the man in Portland who grew tomatoes and watched football. She had spent a lot of years being careful about that word. It had edges. He's going to walk through that door, she said. It wasn't entirely a question. Yes, Alex said. She looked at the door. Okay, she said, and she sat back down, and she was steady, and she was ready, and her hands did not shake at all. 5:23 a.m. What walked through the door at 5:23 a.m. was not her stepfather. It was Dr. Voss. He came in fast, chart in hand, reading glasses back on his forehead, and he had the look of a man who had slept for 2 hours and woken up angrier than he'd been when he went down. He looked at the monitors. He looked at Alex. He looked at Emily on her stool beside the dog, and he stopped walking. You've been here all night, he said. Yes, she said. Your shift ended at 3. I'm aware. He looked at Alex. He looked at Rex. He blew out a breath that had a lot of things compressed into it. His pressure is still low, he said, pulling up the overnight data on the bedside terminal. I know, Emily said. He's been resistant to increasing the fluid rate. Of course he has. Voss pulled on gloves and moved to the bedside, and Rex's head came up, and Voss slowed down with the practiced caution of a man who had learned over the course of one very long night that abrupt movements near this gurney were an excellent way to have a terrible morning. I'm going to examine the wound, he said, in the direction of both Alex and Rex equally, because he was a practical man who had updated his operating procedures based on available data. I'm not going to touch anything else. Rex watched him. Alex said, Go ahead. Voss worked efficiently. He checked the laceration, checked the dressing, pressed 2 fingers to the surrounding tissue, and watched Alex's face for the response. Alex gave him a jaw tighten and nothing else. Voss straightened up. Still needs the OR, he said. The longer we wait. I know, Alex said. Then, 2 hours ago you said the same thing, and I said later, Alex said. Now it's later. I'm ready. Voss blinked. He looked at Emily. Emily looked at the clock. 5:24 a.m. She looked at Alex. Something in his face told her he'd made a calculation, that the window had either passed or changed, that something in the situation had shifted while they'd been talking about blood pressure. What happened? She said to Alex quietly. Nothing happened, he said. Alex. He held her gaze for a moment. The window closed differently than expected, he said carefully. The 2 men left the building at 4:40. That's a different timeline than the one your father described. They left? Marcus appeared in the doorway. The 2 men at the front, they're gone. Security confirmed it 20 minutes ago. I was going to tell you, but you seemed... He gestured vaguely at the scene he'd walked into. Emily turned back to Alex. If they left, then whoever was coming to collect the documentation already collected it, Alex said. She stared at him. When? Before I arrived here, he said quietly. The handoff happened on Route 9. That's why I was on Route 9. His voice was completely level. The men tonight came for confirmation. They wanted to know if I'd completed the transfer or if I still had it. I didn't give them that confirmation, so they had to go verify through other channels. A pause. They've been gone since 4:40. That means they verified. It's done. The room absorbed this. Voss looked between them like a man watching a tennis match played in a language he didn't speak. So the men are gone, the whatever you were waiting for is done, and now you'll let me take you to the OR? Yes, Alex said. Voss closed his eyes briefly in what appeared to be professional relief. Prep OR2, he said to Marcus, and Marcus was already moving. 5:41 a.m. They had 17 minutes before the OR team was ready, and Emily used all 17 of them. She updated the chart, she briefed the surgical nurse, she made sure the blood products were properly ordered and cross-referenced. She worked fast and precise, the way she'd been trained, the way she'd spent 6 years training herself to work. And in the middle of all of it, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text, the Portland number. It said, "Transfer confirmed. You can stand down now. Be proud of yourself." She read it twice. She put the phone back in her pocket. She kept working. Stand down. Like she'd been running an operation. Like the night had been a deployment, and she had held a position, and now the position was no longer necessary. She thought about that for approximately 10 seconds, and then she set it aside because the OR team was calling, and Alex Carter needed to get to surgery, and she was his nurse, and that was what mattered right now, in this moment, in this room. Rex knew something was happening. He was on his feet, tracking the increased movement, and when the surgical transport team came in with the transfer gurney, he took a position that made the lead transporter stop dead in his tracks. "Oh no," the transporter said. "Nobody told me about—" "It's okay," Emily said, moving to Rex's side. She crouched down to his eye level. She looked at him directly. "Rex," she said, calm, even, direct. "He's going to be okay. They're going to fix him. I need you to let them." Rex looked at her. He looked at Alex. Alex said, "Bleib. Stay." Rex sat. Alex looked at Emily from the gurney. "He'll stay with you," he said, "if you're okay with that." She looked at the 90-pound military dog sitting at her feet, and she thought about all the ways this night had rewritten what she understood about herself and her history and her family. "Yeah," she said, "I'm okay with that." The transport team moved. The gurney moved. And at the moment Alex passed through the trauma bay doors, he turned his head and looked at Emily one last time. She had expected the controlled, flat expression, the stone face, the man who didn't give things away. Instead, what she saw was something she hadn't seen from him yet, something open, something that had cost him something to show. Gratitude was part of it, but it wasn't all of it. Recognition was part of it. Something that looked, almost, like the beginning of trust being extended, rather than merely acknowledged. Then the doors swung closed, and he was gone. Rex watched the doors for a long time. Emily put her hand on his back. He leaned against her leg, just slightly, and she felt the solid, warm weight of him, and she breathed. 6:17 a.m. The waiting was its own kind of work. Emily knew this. She had always known this intellectually, from nursing school, from the textbooks that described the psychological burden of the waiting room, the waiting hallway, the waiting stool beside a door that wasn't opening yet. She had never known it quite this personally. She sat in the corridor outside the OR with Rex beside her, and she drank the terrible coffee that Marcus had brought her, and she was very calm on the outside and somewhat less calm on the inside, and she thought about her father. Not her stepfather, her real father, the hardware store man, the Little League coach, the man who had died when she was 9 from a thing no one saw coming, a clot moving through his body without announcement or permission. She thought about how she had always understood grief as something that had a clear object. You lost someone, you grieved them. The grief had a name and a face and a shape. She had grieved her father clearly and specifically for 15 years. What she felt now was different. It was the grief of discovering that the shape of your own story is not what you thought it was. The grief of retroactive revision. All the years she'd spent being careful about the word father, keeping a careful emotional distance from the quiet man in Portland, protecting herself from the possibility that she mattered less to him than the work did. And now this. A phone call at 5 in the morning. The weight of a story she'd been living inside without knowing it. "You okay?" Marcus said, from the nurse's station across the corridor. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. He looked at Rex. He brought her a second coffee without being asked, which was how she knew he didn't believe her, but also understood that she needed to be left alone. And she appreciated both things equally. Rex put his nose against her hand. She turned her palm up, and he pressed his muzzle into it for 1 second, and then lifted his head again, back to watching the corridor. She smiled, just slightly, to herself. 6:58 a.m. The first sign of trouble was a sound. A door, 3 corridors away, closing harder than it needed to. Rex heard it before anyone else. His head came up, his body went still in the precise and total way that meant he was pulling all of his processing power into one focused point. Emily stood up from the chair. "What?" she said to the dog. It was barely a whisper. Rex stood. He didn't growl. He looked at the corridor to the left. Emily looked at the corridor to the left. The thin man came around the corner alone, without the broad, sandy-haired man, without an ID held out. He walked with his hands visible, and his pace deliberately unthreatening, and that was what scared Emily more than any aggressive entry would have. He was being careful. He was being calculated. He had revised his approach. Rex stepped in front of Emily. The thin man stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the dog. He looked at Emily. He said, "The transfer was incomplete." Emily said nothing. "There was a second document," he said. "Carter is the only person who can confirm its location. I need 5 minutes with him." "He's in surgery," Emily said. Something moved across the thin man's face, quick and dark. "When will he be out?" "I don't have that information," she said. "You've been his nurse all night," he said. "You have every piece of information about this patient. Don't do that." "I have medical information," she said. "That's different from what you're asking." He looked at her for a long moment. "You know," he said, "you've been very helpful to Mr. Carter tonight. I want you to understand that we are not his enemies. The documentation he's been carrying relates to a national security matter of significant—" "I'm going to stop you there," Emily said. Her voice was level, her hands were loose. Rex was a wall of focused silence between her and the corridor. "The men who are actually authorized to talk to this patient have my stepfather's direct line, and they know how to use it. You are not those men. So I'm going to ask you, one time, to leave this floor." The thin man's expression shifted. Something in it got colder. "Your stepfather," he said slowly. "Yes," she said. A beat. He was recalculating again. She could see it, the fast internal revision of a man who had just encountered information that changed the parameters of his situation. "Thomas Kareb's people," he said, and the name came out flat and hard and told her more than he intended, because the fact that he knew the name meant he knew the history, and the history was exactly the leverage he'd been hoping she didn't have. "Thomas Kareb's people," she confirmed, and kept her face completely still. "And my stepfather's people, who know exactly where I am and what has been happening in this building tonight." She paused. "I'm 24 years old, and I've been a nurse for 6 days, and I've spent this entire night making decisions above my pay grade. I am very tired, and I have a 90-pound dog at my feet who has had an extremely long evening." She looked at him directly. "Please leave." The thin man held her gaze for 5 full seconds. Rex was absolutely motionless. The corridor was absolutely quiet. Then the thin man turned and walked back the way he had come, and his footsteps retreated down the corridor, and a door opened and closed, and he was gone. Emily let out a breath that started somewhere around her ankles and came up through her entire body. Her legs were shaking. Not badly, not visibly, but they were shaking. She sat back down in the chair, and Rex turned and sat beside her, and she put both hands on his head and held on for a moment, just a moment, just long enough to let the shaking pass. "Good boy," she said, and her voice was perfectly steady. She didn't know how. 7:34 a.m. Voss came out of the OR at 7:34 a.m. with his mask pulled down and his gloves off, and the particular looseness in his shoulders that Emily had already learned to read as a surgery that had gone the way it was supposed to go. "He's stable," he said before she could ask. "The damage was contained to the muscle layer. We repaired it cleanly. He's going to need 4 to 6 weeks of real rest, which I suspect will be the hardest part of his recovery, given everything I have seen of this man's personality tonight." He paused. He looked at Emily. He looked at Rex. He said, with the slightly grudging quality of a man who prided himself on professional distance, but was human underneath it, "You did good work tonight, Watson." Emily looked at him. "Thank you, Dr. Voss." "I still object to the dog," he said. "I know," she said. He almost smiled. He didn't, quite. He turned and walked away, and she looked at the OR doors, and she breathed. 8:02 a.m. They brought Alex to recovery at 8:02 a.m., and Emily walked in beside the transport team, and Rex walked beside Emily. And when they positioned the gurney and the transport team stepped back, Rex moved to his station at the foot of the bed with the reliable gravity of something returning to its natural position. And the rightness of it made Emily's chest feel tight in a way she didn't try to analyze. Alex was still under the anesthesia. His face was slack in a way that it never was when he was conscious. All that discipline and control temporarily released. Just a man, just a body working on healing itself. The machinery of survival doing its quiet, necessary work underneath the skin. She stood beside the bed and she checked his vitals and she adjusted the blanket over him and she did all the things she was trained to do. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, she became aware that there was someone else in the doorway. She turned. The man in the doorway was in his early 60s, lean and unhurried, wearing a gray jacket over a plain shirt. His hair mostly white now, but his eyes the particular sharp and present quality that she had grown up reading at the breakfast table on Sunday mornings. He was carrying 2 cups of hospital coffee, one in each hand, and he was looking at Alex Carter in the bed with an expression that had nothing calculated in it, nothing performed, nothing held back. Just a man looking at someone he had trained and fought beside and nearly lost, and feeling all of that in a way he couldn't entirely contain. Then he looked at Emily. She hadn't planned what she would say. She had thought about it during the long hours of the night, had rehearsed various versions, measured, careful, the kind of words that kept the walls in place, and all of them left her now, completely and without ceremony. And what came out instead was honest and undefended and 6 years overdue. "You should have told me," she said. He nodded. No argument, no explanation first. Just the nod of a man accepting a true thing. "Yes," he said, "I should have." "I knew something," she said. "I knew the shape of something I didn't have words for my whole life. I knew there was a wall, and I couldn't see what was behind it, and I needed—" She stopped, steadied. "I needed to know that what was behind it was worth protecting." He crossed to her. He handed her one of the coffees. He looked at her for a moment with those eyes that she had her stepfather's eyes, which was something she had told herself wasn't true for years, because she didn't want to admit how much she wanted it to be true. "It was always worth protecting," he said quietly, "and so were you. I know I did a bad job of showing you which one I was protecting more carefully." She took the coffee. She held it. "Rex accepted me," she said, because she needed to say it, needed him to understand the weight of what that meant in the context of everything she'd learned tonight. He looked at the dog. Rex looked back at him with calm recognition, the greeting of one entity to another that they both knew well. Something moved through her stepfather's face. "Of course he did," he said softly. "He's a good judge." He looked at Emily. "So am I." She looked at Alex in the bed. She looked at Rex. She looked at the cup of terrible hospital coffee in her hands, and the morning light coming through the recovery room window, and the shape of the night settling into something that wasn't quite over, but was different now. Fuller, more legible. The way a photograph gets when it finally comes into focus. "He said you saved his life," she said, 3 years ago, on a job. "He saved mine first," her stepfather said. "That's how it works, in the teams. You keep taking turns until you can't anymore." He paused. "He's a good man, Em. One of the best I've ever trained." She thought about gray eyes and a voice like gravel, and a dog that had spent an entire night being a wall between one man and everything that wanted to get through to him. She thought about the code she hadn't spoken yet, the things she'd been carrying in the back of her mind all night, the phrase her stepfather had said once at that kitchen table when she was 16, offhandedly, the way people say things they don't realize you're storing. She had not used it. She had not needed to use it. She had found another way in, a longer way, a more honest way, and she thought that maybe that was the point. Maybe the code was never the door. Maybe the code was just proof that you knew where the door was. Rex made a sound, and Alex Carter's hand, on the blanket, opened slowly, the same gesture she'd seen at the very beginning of the night, the fingers uncurling from a fist, the first and smallest act of trust. Even under the anesthesia, even in the recovery room, somewhere deep in him, the threat assessment was still running, and somewhere deep in it, this room was passing. Emily put her hand near his on the blanket, not touching, just near. Rex watched her hand. He put his nose against it. She turned her palm up. He pressed into it, held for 2 seconds, and then lifted his head and resumed his watch. His version of approval, his version of welcome. She understood now that they were the same thing, in the language he spoke. Her stepfather stood beside her, and they were both quiet for a moment, and the recovery room was quiet around them, and the morning was coming up outside, and it had the quality of a particular kind of morning, the kind that exists on the other side of something, that you don't get to unless you go through. "Stay," her stepfather said softly, and it was the same word Alex had said to Rex hours ago in a different room, and it carried the same weight, the weight of a request that was also a trust. She stayed. 8:19 a.m. Alex Carter woke up the way he did everything else, fast and complete, no gradual surfacing, no foggy middle ground between under and awake. One moment he was gone, and the next moment he was entirely present, his eyes open, his breathing controlled, his body running its immediate inventory the way it had been trained to do. Location, threat level, assets. The ceiling of a hospital recovery room, low threat. Rex at the foot of the bed, ears forward, watching the door. Emily Watson on a chair to his left, asleep with her chin on her chest and a paper coffee cup still loosely held in one hand. And a man in a gray jacket standing at the window with his back to the room, looking out at the morning. Alex said, "You're late." The man at the window turned. And the thing about his face, which Alex had spent 12 years learning to read, was that it almost never surprised him anymore. He knew every register of that face, the operational stillness, the dry humor underneath it, the particular way it looked when something had cost him more than he would admit. He knew all of it. What he did not know was the version he was looking at right now, the version that had been up all night, that had lines around the eyes that hadn't been there the last time they'd been in the same room, that was looking at Alex with something that was equal parts relief and something older and heavier that Alex could not immediately name. "I told you 2 hours," the man said. "You told Emily 2 hours," Alex said. "I didn't get that call. You were busy bleeding." Fair point. Alex pushed himself up on one elbow. His side fired a protest that he acknowledged and set aside. "It's done?" "It's done," the man said. "The documentation is with the right people. It's been verified. The chain of custody is clean." He paused. "It's over, Alex." Alex absorbed that. 2 words. 3 years of work, 6 operations, 4 men lost, 1 night on Route 9 in the dark with 6 wounds, and a dog and a rookie nurse who had turned out to be something nobody had planned for. It's over. He turned the words over in his mind the way you turned over something fragile, checking for cracks. The thin man, Alex said. He came back. The man in the gray jacket looked at him carefully. How do you know that? Emily's face, Alex said. She's been sitting in that chair for 2 hours and she's been asleep for maybe 40 minutes. The rest of the time she was running something in her head, something she handled and hasn't fully put down yet. He looked at Emily's sleeping face, at the slight tension still present in her jaw, even in sleep. She handled something after the OR. What was it? A beat. She did handle it, the man said quietly. Alone, with Rex. She told him about Karev's people, and she told him about me, and she sent him away. Alex looked at the man for a long moment. She name-dropped you to a hostile operative. Yes. At 6 in the morning after being up all night. Yes. Without hesitating, according to the security footage, the man said, she looked like she'd been doing it her entire life. Alex looked back at Emily, at the coffee cup in her hand, at the absolute trustworthiness of someone who had been given every reason to step back and had stepped forward instead, every single time, all night, without calculation and without complaint. She's going to be remarkable, he said. She already is, her stepfather said. 8:44 a.m. Emily woke up to the specific feeling of being watched, which was a feeling she had grown up with and had learned not to mistake for a threat. She opened her eyes and Alex was awake in the bed looking at her, and her stepfather was standing beside the window, looking at both of them, and Rex was looking at her from the foot of the bed with patient, dark eyes. You were asleep, Alex said. I was resting my eyes, she said, for 40 minutes. I have excellent eyes. They needed significant rest. She sat up straight. The coffee in her hand was stone cold. She looked at it and set it on the side table and ran her hands over her face, and then looked at the monitor beside Alex's bed with the professional attention she would have given it if she hadn't just been asleep in a chair. How are you feeling? 4, he said. Same 4 as before, or better 4? Better 4, he said. Maybe 4.5. The surgery went well, she said. Voss did good work. You're going to need 4 to 6 weeks of rest, Alex said. He told me when I was coming out of anesthesia. I think he wanted to make sure I heard it while I was too sedated to argue. That was smart of him, Emily said. I'm going to be a terrible patient, Alex said. I know, she said. I have already made peace with that. Her stepfather, who had been listening to this exchange with the expression of a man watching something he had hoped for but not expected, cleared his throat. Emily looked at him. The full weight of the night came back into the room with her in it. Everything they had said to each other before the surgery, everything that had been opened and left open, the words, I should have told you, and yes, I should have. The acknowledgement that hung in the air between them like something that had been needed for a long time and was still finding its shape. I need to ask you something, she said to him. Okay, he said. The night you introduced me to Tom, she said, I was 16. You brought him to the house on a Sunday, and you introduced him as a friend from the teams, and you didn't say anything else. But before he left, she paused. You two were in the kitchen and you thought I was upstairs, and I heard him say something to you. She held her stepfather's gaze. He said, she has the instinct, and you said, I know. I've known since she was 12. The recovery room was very quiet. Her stepfather did not look away. Yes, he said. What did that mean? He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding. She knew the difference, had spent years learning the difference between his silences. This was the silence of a man choosing precision over speed. It meant that you had what we look for, he said. The thing you either have or you don't. It's not courage exactly, and it's not intelligence exactly, although it includes both. It's the ability to be in a situation that is larger than you and remain calibrated, to not be consumed by it, To keep thinking, keep feeling, keep functioning while the world is moving faster than it should. You were testing me, she said, all those years. No, he said, and his voice was firm. Never testing, watching. There is a difference. Testing is about pass and fail. I already knew you wouldn't fail. I was watching because I wanted to understand what you were becoming, because you were becoming something extraordinary, and I didn't know how to tell you that without. He stopped. His jaw worked. Without making you feel like you were being prepared for something instead of just being allowed to be yourself. Emily sat with that for a moment. It landed differently than she expected. Not as a wound, as something more complicated and more human than a wound. The honest mistake of a man who had been too careful with one kind of protection and not careful enough with another. I became a nurse, she said. Yes, he said. Not a SEAL, not an operator, a nurse. Yes, he said again, and he smiled, and it was the kind of smile she had seen from him maybe 4 times in her life, the kind that came from somewhere real. And you were exactly where you needed to be last night, doing exactly the thing that needed doing. He paused. I couldn't have planned it. I wouldn't have tried. Rex made a sound, low and warm, the sound he made when he decided something was settled. Alex in the bed said nothing, but his hand on the blanket was open. 9:31 a.m. The conversation that followed was the longest, unguarded conversation Emily had ever had with her stepfather, and it happened in a hospital recovery room with a military working dog as the only other witness, because Alex had fallen back into a healing sleep at some point during it, which her stepfather had waited for with the patience of a man who had been doing things in the right order for 40 years. He told her things. Not everything. She didn't expect everything. And she understood now that expecting everything was the wrong frame entirely. He told her the shape of the work, the reason it mattered, the names she could know and the ones she couldn't. He told her about Karev, about the Sunday morning 7 years ago when he'd gotten the call, how he'd sat in his kitchen in Portland for 2 hours before he could stand up, how he had driven to the coast and walked on the beach alone for 4 hours because there was no other way to carry it. I should have called you, he said. When Tom died, you deserved to know. I would have wanted to know, she said. I know. He looked at his hands. I told myself it would open questions you didn't have the context for, that the wall was protecting you. A pause. That's not entirely wrong, but it's also not entirely honest. The truth is that I didn't know how to tell my daughter that the man whose dog she'd loved when she was 16 was gone, and I couldn't explain why. My daughter, she caught the words. He didn't take them back. He looked up and held her gaze with the steadiness of a man who had decided that precision mattered more than protection right now. I haven't always known how to be what you needed, he said, but I have never, not for one day, not known that you were worth being present for. I want you to know that. She looked at him for a long moment. I know that now, she said. I think I knew it before. I just needed to understand the shape of it. He nodded. The tightness around his eyes released very slightly. The kind of release that happens when something that has been held for a long time is finally set down. In the bed, Alex slept. Rex watched the door. The morning moved past the window with the unhurried confidence of a morning that did not know it had been earned. 10:15 a.m. The twist that came at 10:15 a.m. was quieter than anything that had come before it, and quieter things, Emily had learned over the course of this particular night, were often the ones that cut deepest. Barbara Kowalski appeared in the recovery room doorway. She looked at Emily. She looked at the stepfather. She looked at Alex in the bed and Rex at his feet. She had the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things in 19 years and was currently in the process of cataloging this among them. Watson, she said, I need to talk to you. Emily followed her into the corridor. Barbara walked 2 steps from the door and turned. Administration called me 40 minutes ago, she said, about last night. Emily felt her stomach drop. The 2 men. Among other things, Barbara crossed her arms. There was a formal complaint filed against you, against the handling of the patient, against the presence of the dog. She paused. Dr. Voss filed it. Emily stared at her. Voss? At 4:30 this morning, Barbara said, before he went to sleep. He documented every objection he'd raised during the night and submitted it as a formal incident report. A pause. I want to be clear. This does not reflect my opinion of what happened last night, or of you. You should know that. But, Emily said, but administration wants a formal meeting. Today. You, me, the department head, and Voss. Barbara's expression was precise and careful. And they may ask about the nature of your relationship to the patient. Given that you stayed past your shift, given the personal nature of some of what happened. Emily absorbed this. She thought about 6 days, about a profession she had wanted for as long as she could remember, about a professor who had told her she was too emotional for critical care, in the 3 years she had spent proving him wrong, about all of it potentially hinging on a meeting in a conference room with people who had not been in that trauma bay, who had not felt the quality of that night, who were going to look at the documentation and see a rookie nurse who overstayed her shift and got personally involved with a patient. She breathed. She straightened. What time? She said. 11, Barbara said. I'll be there. Barbara looked at her with the evaluative precision of a woman who had been reading people for 19 years. I have your back in that room, she said. I want you to know that before you go in. I know, Emily said. Thank you, Barbara. She went back into the recovery room. Her stepfather looked at her face and read it in about 2 seconds. What? He said. She told him. He listened. He did not react overtly. His face did the thing it always did with information, taking it in and processing it below the surface. When she finished, he said, Do you want me to make a call? No, she said immediately. He looked at her. No, she said again clearly. I'm not going to walk into that meeting having had someone call ahead for me. I'm going to walk in with what I did last night, and I'm going to defend it on its own terms. She paused. That's how it works, right? You stand by the call. Something moved through her stepfather's face. Pride was part of it. Something deeper was the rest. Yes, he said quietly. That's exactly how it works. Alex from the bed said, without opening his eyes, I'll provide a statement. Emily looked at him. You're supposed to be asleep. I'm a light sleeper, he said. Occupational requirement. He opened his eyes. I'll provide a formal statement about your conduct last night, what you did, how you did it, the specific calls you made and the outcomes they produced. I will put my name on it. Your name is classified, she said. Parts of my name, he said. The parts that matter to a hospital administrator are not. She looked at him for a moment. You don't need to do that. I know, he said. I'm doing it anyway. He held her gaze. You spent all night in this room because the job required it. I'm going to do the same thing. That's how it works. She recognized her own words in his mouth. She felt something in her chest that was too large for its container. Okay, she said. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. You earned it. 11:03 a.m. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. Emily sat across the table from the department head, a man named Gerald Pierce who was in his 50s and had the careful, bureaucratic neutrality of someone who had learned that neutrality was the safest position in any room. Voss was at the far end of the table with his chin up and the self-righteous composure of a man who believed he was right, which was the most dangerous kind of composure. Barbara sat beside Emily and said nothing unless directly addressed, which was its own form of support. The presence of someone who had already decided to hold the line. Emily spoke clearly. She laid out the night in precise order, the way she had been trained to document, not emotionally, not defensively, but factually and completely. The patient's condition on arrival, the dog's behavior, the steps she had taken and why, the outcomes at each stage. She used the language of the profession because it was her language, and she had earned it, and she was not going to let anyone make her feel otherwise. When she finished, Pierce said, "You were aware this was beyond the scope of a first-week rotation." "Yes," she said, "and you proceeded anyway." "The patient would have deteriorated without intervention," she said. "I was the intervention that was available. I used the training and the knowledge I had to provide it. That's what nurses do." Voss made a sound. "Harold," Barbara said in the tone that closed conversations. Pierce looked at the papers in front of him. He looked at the statement that had been submitted electronically at 10:42 a.m. under a name he had spent 10 minutes trying to look up and had found only partial information about. Enough partial information to understand the nature of the man making the statement and to understand that the nature of the man making the statement was the kind that generated very careful decisions from people like Gerald Pierce. He looked at Emily. "The incident report will be filed," he said, "as documentation of an unusual event. It will not constitute a disciplinary action." He paused. "Your conduct will be noted in your personnel file as exceptional, under the circumstances." Voss pushed back from the table. "Harold," Pierce said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't Barbara's version of the word. That was the version of the word used by someone who controlled Harold Voss's contract and annual review. And Voss heard it and went very still. Emily said, "Thank you." She meant it simply and completely and without any performance of humility. She stood up, she shook Pierce's hand. She walked out of the conference room and into the corridor, and Barbara followed her, and they walked to the elevator, and Barbara pressed the button, and they stood in silence for a moment. "Exceptional," Barbara said. "I heard it," Emily said. "Under the circumstances," Barbara said. "I heard that too." The elevator opened. They got in. Barbara pressed the button for the floor. "You know," she said, as the doors closed, "I've been doing this for 19 years and I have never, not once in 19 years, told a first-week nurse they were doing the right thing by going past their mandate." Emily looked at her. "But you were," Barbara said. "I want to say that directly and without qualification. You were doing exactly the right thing." Emily held those words the way she'd held the terrible hospital coffee all morning, carefully, with both hands, aware of the warmth. "Thank you," she said, "for having my back." "That's the job," Barbara said. Exactly the same words Emily had used all night, the same clean logic, the same refusal to dress the thing up in anything it didn't need. "That's the job." Emily smiled. "Yeah," she said, "it is." 12:47 p.m. Alex was moved to a regular room at noon, and by 12:47 p.m., he was sitting up in bed, eating hospital food with the expression of a man who had eaten far worse things in far worse places and was not going to complain. Rex was on the floor beside the bed, having negotiated his presence in the regular room through a combination of Emily's advocacy and the specific look that Rex gave hospital staff members when they suggested he leave, which was a look that tended to resolve negotiations quickly. Her stepfather had gone to make calls. The real work of closing out the operation, the documentation and notifications, and careful unthreading of the last 3 years that would take weeks and would happen in rooms Emily would never see. He had said goodbye to her in the corridor outside the recovery room, and it was different from any goodbye she could remember them sharing. He had hugged her. He was not a man who hugged easily, and she was not a woman who asked for it. But he had put his arms around her and held on for 3 full seconds and said into her hair, "Come to Portland. Whenever you're ready, I'll be there." She had said, "I know," and she had meant it both ways. "I know you'll be there, and I know that I know it now, finally, in the way I needed to." Now she sat in the chair beside Alex's bed and watched him eat hospital food, and she thought about the long, complicated corridor of the night she had just come through. 12 hours, 1 patient, 1 dog, 1 code she had never spoken, One story she had been living inside without a map. "You're thinking," Alex said. "I'm always thinking." "You're thinking louder than usual." She looked at him. "The code," she said. "The one my father mentioned to you. The phrase he gave you when he trained you." She paused. "I never used it." Alex set down the fork. He looked at her with full attention. "No," he said. "You didn't." "I thought about it," she said, "when I first walked into the trauma bay. I knew I had it. I knew it might work." She paused. "But it felt wrong to use it, like using a key you found instead of one you earned." She looked at her hands. "So I didn't." Alex was quiet for a moment. "Rex accepted you without it," he said. "Yes, I accepted you without it." "Yes. Then you already know what that means," he said. She looked up. He was watching her with the gray eyes that she had spent the whole night learning to read. The eyes that gave very little, but meant everything they gave. And what she saw in them now was the thing she had seen briefly at the moment the OR doors closed. Trust extended rather than merely acknowledged. And the difference between those two things was the difference between a door that was open and a door that had never needed to be locked in the first place. "The code was never the point," she said slowly. "No," he said, "the code is a test. The point is who you are when there is no code. When there's no phrase, no protocol, no key, just you and the situation and what you decide to do." He paused. "That's what my team leader taught me. That's what your father taught me. And that's what you showed last night, without anyone teaching it to you, because you didn't need it taught. You already knew." The room was quiet. Rex looked at Emily from the floor. She looked back at him, and she thought about a Malinois named Ranger on Sunday mornings when she was 8 years old, and about the shape of a life that had been preparing itself for a particular night without telling her that was what it was doing, and about all the walls she had spent years trying to see through, and the moment, not dramatic, not announced, when the walls became unnecessary because she had found the door. She reached down and touched Rex's head. He pressed into her hand with the solid, warm certainty of an animal that had made its decision and was not revising it. "What happens now?" she said, to Alex, to the room, to the morning and the question it was holding out. "Now," Alex said, "you go home and sleep for approximately 14 hours. And then you come back," he said simply, "and you do the work. The same way you did it last night, because that's who you are." He held her gaze. "The rest works itself out." She looked at him for a long moment, at this man who had arrived broken and guarded and armored in every way a person could be armored, and had spent one night in a room with her and ended up, piece by piece, becoming legible. Not soft, he was never going to be soft, and she didn't need him to be, but present, real, as honest in his own language as she tried to be in hers. "You're going to be a terrible patient," she said again. "You're going to be an exceptional nurse," he said. "We'll balance out." She stood up. She gathered her bag. She looked at Rex, who was watching her with the steady dark eyes that had evaluated her at the beginning of the night and had kept their verdict ever since. "Take care of him," she said to Rex. Rex's ears moved forward. His chin lifted. He held her gaze with the absolute, unambiguous attention of a professional who understood the assignment completely. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the frame. She turned back once, the way you turn back when you want to fix a moment, when you want to carry it forward with you in the fullness of what it actually was. Alex Carter was sitting up in his hospital bed in a regular room in a small-town hospital, eating food that was not good and not complaining about it, his military working dog at his feet, a tattoo on his right forearm that marked him as one of fewer than 30 men alive who carried it. He looked like a man who had been through something significant and was already, quietly, irrevocably deciding what came next. He looked like a man who had been found. Emily Watson walked out into the corridor, and the morning came up bright and clear around her, and she carried with her everything the night had given her, the knowledge of her own instincts, the shape of a family she had not fully claimed until now, the weight and warmth of being exactly the person a moment needed when the moment arrived. She had walked into a trauma bay at midnight, not knowing what she was walking toward. She had walked out of it understanding something essential about herself that no classroom had been able to teach and no textbook had been able to hold. You didn't need the code. You never had. The only key that mattered was the one you were already carrying, the one built from everything you had lived and everyone who had shaped you, and every hard thing you had chosen not to walk away from. She had that key. She had always had it. And now, for the first time, she knew exactly what door it opened.